Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to PG Talks. I'm your host, Bill Phillips, and I'm here with Chuck Nisbett and Tracy Calgheros, our regular panelists who also join us. Todd Corrigal and Mackenzie Kerr aren't going to make it today. I was going to say aren't with us today, but that's not a good way to say things. I think they're still with us, but they're just not here. So not much going on this week other than, a provincial election.
Oh,
that sort of maybe came out of the blue for some people, perhaps not. But yeah, we're going to the polls October 24th. Let's go to Tracy for some thoughts on this.
I don't even know where to start. I'm really disappointed, actually, that it's gone this route. And that's not a partisan statement in the least. I don't think we need to hype up the partisan rhetoric right now. And I don't see how we avoid that as we enter into an election, particularly given that there's no non-confidence vote. There's no need for this election right now. The government has been working really well collaboratively. Why mess with a good thing in the middle of 2020? Why tempt the fates is how I see it.
Yeah, I guess John Horgan is certainly rolling the dice here. It's a big gamble. If it pays off, he gets a majority. If it doesn't pay off, he gets blasted off into oblivion. Chuck, what's your take on racing to the polls this fall?
I have to say I'm with Tracy on this. I really didn't think it was going to happen right now. It just seems like the wrong time. There's too much going on. There's too much to deal with. And things were working. They were making things happen provincially. All parties working together to deal with COVID and make sure things were dealt with effectively, And all of a sudden, he pulls this and it could throw a big wrench into everything. And it could take a long time for things to settle down after an election. So I don't know. I don't think it was a good plan. I really wish he hadn't done it right now.
Yeah. I guess is, will it actually hurt him at the polls?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the big question. I guess Horgan said that, probably still going to be in the pandemic a year from now. So really what's changed other than there'll be a year of politicking leading up to the election. So we might as well get that out of the way now. Do you believe him, Tracy, or do you accept that that excuse or reason, whatever way you want to look at it?
I'm struggling with this. The fact that there is an agreement in place between the NDP and the Green Party that specifically precluded an early election call, barring the fall of the government. I'm really struggling with looking at this as being anything other than a power grab. And I feel bad saying that because I actually am really impressed with how the government has been running things, especially through this crisis. But I don't know how to read it any other way to look at it from the outside.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I think this is a power grab, and it's hard to say power grab because he's already got power. But it's definitely a ploy to keep power, which I guess you could say is a power grab as well. But Chuck, going forward, do you think? Let's put it this way: any predictions? Do you think this will pay off? Do you think British Columbians will punish him at the polls for doing this?
That's a tricky question. I mean, he's done well. It's been going quite well since the last election, and he's been effective through this whole COVID pandemic. And I could see why he would want to capitalize on that right now. Mm-hmm. But, I think a lot of people are going to feel that it's too soon. And there's too much other business to be taken care of beforehand. So I don't think it's going to play out quite the way he wants. I really don't. I think if he doesn't end up back in exactly the same position he's in now, it could be worse with the Liberals pulling ahead of him. So I think he could be in trouble after this one.
Yeah, and if they go back to exactly where they are, they've lost the support of the Greens, I would suspect.
Yeah.
So, so we return with exactly the same number count. I don't think there's another confidence and supply agreement coming at us on your first no. And
No, they're just going to say, that's enough. See you later. You did it to us once.
Yeah.
Well, and I think really it's probably the Green Party that actually has some opportunity for growth here because of this. Like if there is going to be punishment happening at the polls, someone who's looking to punish the NDP for this that isn't already a BC Liberal supporter will probably be looking to someplace like the Greens as a place to put their vote. And in close ridings, there could be some swing to Green seats, I think. I also think that they're going to impact that sort of center left federal liberal type person, for lack of a better characterization, that maybe doesn't feel they have a logical or an easy to see home with any of the parties in British Columbia. And so if in fact those centrists were looking at the NDP, now you have to look at the fact that they're reneging on a signed agreement with their political party that's been working with them, and that they're prepared to put political power ahead of overarching community well-being and health. I think that could hurt them on the undecided voter or that center-left voter who is trying to decide where to park their vote in this moment. I don't think it will impact anyone that was already supporting the BC Liberals. I don't think that there's any significant danger in the ridings here in Northern BC. Shirley and Mike have both been excellent representatives, and I think they have pan-party support. So I'm interested to see what happens in some of the ridings outside of our area.
Mm-hmm. But let's just talk about our ridings just quickly. Then we'll move off to the controversial one out west. Chuck, do you see the local ridings here doing anything other than going to Shirley Bond and Mike Morris, the incumbents, and even John Rustad in the Chaco Lakes? I think they're pretty solid Liberal ridings.
I can't see any reason to change things. They're both veteran MLAs that have proved themselves effective and have really brought the needs of the region to the forefront a lot of times, and kept them in the forefront provincially. So I've seen no reason at all that there should be any change within with the MLAs we have at present. I know they're both in it for this election. I don't know how much longer we're going to get them. So I would say let's stay with them and use what we can, because they are an amazing resource for us.
Tracy, in Prince George Mackenzie, the NDP is putting forward Mackenzie Mayor Joan Atkinson. Do you think that she will make a difference? It'll be interesting to see whether she can carry Mackenzie for the NDP, and how much of a difference that makes through the rest of the riding. Because I think Morris won it last time with well over 50% of the vote. So.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the numbers for the provincial returns out of those ridings, but certainly the Mackenzie mayor is a popular individual and lots of time on council, been supported and elected many times. So I think it was a smart move on the NDP's front to find a candidate like that to run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure of the population mix between, like, how much of that entire riding is made up of or how much Mackenzie makes up that riding. Like, is it 40% or 50%? I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember the numbers, but that could make a difference.
I'm not sure if it tracks the same as the federal boundaries, but I know the northern riding federally takes about half of Prince George, and the bulk of the voting population in both Caribou Prince George and Prince George Peace River really is Prince George, but it's split in half. And I think it's the same provincially.
Yeah, probably. The boundary, I believe, probably goes down along the highway, right? Highway 16.
Probably, yeah.
Somewhere around there. But moving on to Stikine, which is the controversial riding with former MP Nathan Cullen running for the NDP in that riding. And of course, the controversy, Anita McPhee of the Tahltan had put forward her name, depending who you talk to, after, and the NDP had consulted trying to find someone with to fill their equity rules, and they basically shoved her aside for Nathan Cullen. And the rule there was with the NDP is if a sitting MLA steps down or isn't running again, that they try to find someone from an underrepresented group, Indigenous women, that kind of thing. And they apparently looked and couldn't find anybody, so Cullen said yes. And then Anita McPhee come up and said, "Hey, what about me?" So, Chuck, what's your take on that? Is that just a mess, or?
It's messy. Like, it really is a mess. It just does. This should all have been worked out beforehand. Before it all got brought forward, it should have all been sorted out. And it's kind of unfortunate the way it's kind of presented to the public now. I don't know. It doesn't look good on the party in any which way, Nathan Cullen kind of looks like he's kind of being a little heavy-handed now, and I don't think he should be. He really deserves that, but the whole way of just kind of pushing ahead back in and ignoring her is making it kind of tough. It's I don't know. It's not a pretty situation, I don't find.
Horgan said that I think it was of 6 of the 8 ridings in the north are the NDP is putting forward female candidates, and 2 of them are Indigenous. So basically said that's enough, or that's good enough to meet their diversity things. Tracy, what's your view on that?
We need different voices at all of the tables, and just because you are putting a woman forward in one riding doesn't negate the need to have those differing voices in another riding. I don't know anything about the controversy in the Stikine riding there. When I saw that Nathan Cullen had been announced as the candidate, I thought, oh, well, that's the next leader of the provincial NDP and likely our next premier.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Like, politically, it seemed very logical to me to have gone that route. And when Murray Rankin also has now put forward his name to run, those are some fairly significant names from a federal level, and I think that that'll have an impact provincially. How you square that circle when you're talking about the need to broaden the voices at the table, I think all parties need to rethink what they're doing. There's been a push since I was first involved in politics back in the 90s in the Liberal Party around the Judy LaMarche Foundation and the push to have more female candidates involved in politics. And there's lots of discussion over the last 25 years around so-called quotas of, you need this many women and this many people of color and this many Indigenous people. And I don't agree with quotas, but at the same time, not having attention paid to it isn't making the kind of inroads that we need to be making. Hence the reason that we're now sitting in the midst of systemic racism 30 years later that we still haven't dealt with. Systemic racism that's 400 years old, mind you, but I'm just talking about the last few years that I've been involved in political stuff. So no, I think it's absolutely logical that if Nathan Cullen was willing to run, that they wanted him. But I think that that's a completely separate discussion from equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility.
Chuck, Tracy talks about not having quotas. So without quotas for diversity on the ticket, how do we get that? How do you make sure that there is diversity on the political ticket?
That's an interesting question. I mean, the quotas, yeah, then you're going to go out and positively search for somebody to fill them, right? But those people are still there without quotas, and you can just let your membership know that we're open to this idea, you know, and people will come forward. People that want to serve will come forward, you know. Not so much going out and tapping someone on the shoulder and saying, hey, I think you'd be a great candidate, but maybe just letting people know that there's an opening and they can try, you know. As I've said before, I don't think people that want to be politicians should be politicians. I really don't think that at all. I think it should be people who are just doing what needs to be done, that, you know, maybe they get a few people come up and say, it's time, maybe you should step up for this one. And I think that's how it works. And I think if you look at those people that are doing things behind the scenes, you will find more and more of the female and the people of color and the Aboriginal all doing work that needs to be brought forward. And I think you will see that those positions are filled the way they need to be, organically, you know, without the quota.
We're having the same discussion around the board succession planning for the Canadian Association of Science Centers. And our discussion has led us down this path where we can't fix our diversity issues on the CASC board because we're pulling from senior management in science centers from across the country, and senior management has a diversity issue. And you can't simply move someone into a CEO seat with no experience. So you need to be addressing equity and diversity at not just entry-level positions, but in education, in getting kids interested at 3 years old in the idea of becoming an engineer, and maybe then someday working in a science center and becoming a CEO and serving on the board. So there's also this lag between being able to change up the composition of some of these boards, and the number of people of color that are available with the necessary expertise to be able to step in today rather than next year is really quite small. And they're under huge demand for their time right now because everyone is doing their best to try and address this need for diverse voices. I don't think you can do that in an instantaneous turnaround. This is a generational problem that we now have, and that we need to be addressing from the time kids are in diapers and you're looking at early education and support for movement into STEAM or movement into administrative or political roles. Right now, I think it's not so much about changing who the candidate is on the ticket for this election, but we need to change who's coming up and who's interested and how they're going to get involved.
And you're quite right, is that I think one of the downsides of political parties appointing candidates, it's always been this way, is that everybody in the riding who may be thinking about it, it's kind of like, oh, well, I don't have an in with the leader, so, you know, I don't have a vote. And I guess one of the things with a snap election like this is that you avoid the candidate selection process of you know, holding nomination meetings and votes actually amongst the membership, which kind of goes by the wayside, right? And that's where a lot of these things come from, and that adds another part to the diversity thing, is that you know, so if the party picks someone who is a Nathan Cullen and goes through that candidate selection party, and then the party over that says, no, we want a diversity candidate, then what do you do? Chuck, you got any thoughts on?
Well, that's kind of the place you get put when you pull something like this. You know, you pull Nathan Cullen in and say, yeah, this is the man we want, and you've got people looking around the party in that area going, but we thought we were going to do this, and you've got a chance of upsetting the people in your riding, and you know, it could fall the wrong way. It could blow up in their faces that way. And I mean, a lot of people know Nathan Cullen because he's a national figure, right? But what if there is a candidate there that they were more prepared to put their belief behind, you know? And what if they don't believe that he has their writings interests at heart, you know? And it's a snap election. It's going to go through very quickly. We've only got a month. That's not a lot of time to convince people in a riding that you're the person they want, right? You know, yeah, you're going to get the people that are going to go the party route, but are you going to get the people who are going to be behind you as a person? And it could make for an interesting election there. I don't know if a snap election, once again, I don't think it was a smart idea. I just don't really think it was well thought out. I think they just went, yeah, we're doing okay, let's go.
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about the idea that that was going to do away with candidate selection at a riding by riding level, but you're absolutely right, it will, which is yet another reason that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that we've done this, that the government has decided to do this in the midst of a pandemic. Nothing about this makes any sense to me. I don't see how you can look at it other than as opportunistic.
Yeah, and that's all it is, really.
Yeah.
And the last thing this world needs right now is any level of government either being or appearing to be opportunistic.
Yeah. We've had election in New Brunswick, and Saskatchewan's going to go through another one. I don't follow those enough to know whether those elections are opportunistic or not. But yeah, it's a tough call, and it certainly is making politics everything. But let's get on to the next thing about an election during a pandemic. Do you think voter turnout numbers will go way down, or how's that going to work out, Tracy?
Not sure. I don't really have an issue with going to the polls during a pandemic. My concern really has more like from a health standpoint. I'll wear my mask, I'll hand sanitize, I'll go and mark my ballot, and I'll leave and I'll hand sanitize again. So I'm okay with that piece of it. I'm a little concerned for the individual volunteers and staff that have to sit at those polling stations and what level of exposure that will mean for them. But that's something that I presume Elections BC will sort out. I have more of an issue with every election that I've ever been involved with raises partisanship to a fever pitch. And the last thing in the world we need right now is any more partisanship or any more politicization of science or recommendations from our health professionals. I cannot see how dialing everybody up helps in this situation. And that's my issue about having an election during a pandemic. It's not that I'm worried about viral transmission specifically, it's that I'm concerned about what it will do to public discourse.
Yeah, Chuck, thoughts on that? Certainly, we've talked about before some of the on different issues, some of the heated rhetoric that goes on online around racism, around Trudeau, around all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think Tracy probably has a point. It's going to ramp that up.
Well, I don't know. I feel in a lot of ways that it's gonna be affected by the pandemic. I think a lot of people are gonna stay home. I'm out in the public all the time. I have people coming up to where I work all the time and discussing what's happening with the pandemic and how it's affecting the North and how the North is faring. And I think we will find numbers down quite a bit.
It's not like we have a high turnout anyway.
Well, that's true. That's exactly it. And a lot of our traditional participants are older. And a lot of those older people are staying home, staying away from everything. And I can't see our younger people, our younger population taking up that slack. So I think we're going to see a drop in voters. And yeah, because of that, I have a horrible feeling we're going to end up with a lot of the whole partisan same old again, you know?
What about absentee ballots and mail-in ballots for the province like that? Obviously, we're not changing legislation now, but is there not legislation in place that in theory people could request?
They said yesterday, Elections BC said yesterday on the first day of being able to request mail-in ballots, they received 20,000 requests.
Ooh.
Put that in perspective, in 2017, there was 6,500 for the entire election.
Yeah.
So there may be a lot of people going to the mail-in route, which is fine. We're not the US, we're not crapping on Canada Post yet. So, you know, they should be in time. But the interesting part about that is in all these close ridings, they don't count those ballots until 13 days after the election.
Yeah.
So, and the reason for that is they have to make sure that the voter, or they check it against the people who voted in person to make sure that people didn't vote twice. Plus, all the ballots are sent back to the riding from which they're voting for, so they can get tallied in those ridings. So, in one way, it's like we're not like the U.S. Another way, we could be like the U.S. in that the outcome of the election might not be known for 2 or 3 weeks after the election.
Yeah. That's a very interesting point, because it could actually change the whole outcome with numbers like 20,000 right away.
Yeah.
If that trend continues for any length of time throughout this election period, it could be considerable power in that mail-in vote.
Yep. Yeah, and people can vote early in that case with the mail-in ballots, so then it eliminates the need for some of the rhetoric. Listening to that number, it would not shock me then to see actually an increase in voter turnout, but that turnout wouldn't be known until 13 days later. It's an interesting time.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be a different election, which we all know. We've saying that all along because of the pandemic. But that's part of it is the absentee ballots or the mail-in ballots, which in my mind, if more people vote that way, great.
Yeah,
I can wait.
Yeah,
well, as long as we get as many people's opinion as possible, right? As many people out there voting as possible, that I don't see a problem with it. But yeah, it could be very interesting.
But go ahead, Tracy.
I just was saying that's a big number, 20,000 requests day one in Canada, where we don't traditionally worry about things like mail-in ballots. I think that's significant.
Yeah, it really is. But the other part of that, along with the pandemic, is that it's certainly going to be a different campaign in that you're not going to have big rallies. You're not going to have, I don't know if we'll have any town halls or candidate debates, that kind of stuff. So the question for candidates is, how do they get their message out other than TikTok videos?
Well, and that'll speak to the demographics. Younger candidates, younger voters, they will be engaging online in a variety of social media platforms. And I would say that folks that have limited internet connectivity and where they live, and older people that maybe aren't as active on social media, it's not all of them, but there are definitely some, and it would skew in the older demographic. They're not going to have access to that. So then their only source for information is going to really be news.
Yeah. Right on.
As it should be, right?
And those candidates better start forking over dollars for advertising, I tell you.
Well, maybe we could get all of the local candidates onto this panel.
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking we'll probably do something along those lines over the campaign. I think that'd be great. So it all depends on whether they will or not. So
I think that's a great idea.
What kind of an impact this will have on the infrastructure grant program that's out there too right now. It's top of mind for me because I'm in the middle of preparing an infrastructure grant application for the museum. But now that you add a provincial election into the middle of this, how will that impact the ability to move all of that forward by the deadlines. I mean, the deadline for submission on that is October 1st. The election is not till the 24th. Like, what's that going to do to all of these nonprofits, well beyond museums, but anyone that's accessing infrastructure funding? Does that just mean all of that now waits? It's just a bad time to do this.
And that's sort of the question in elections all the time. Like, what gets put on pause during the election? What funding, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, Chuck, what other ramifications do you see as having a COVID election? Whether it could be a positive or a negative?
Well, just that it's a COVID election, that we're kind of in a rebound right now of COVID, and it's really starting to affect the province a lot more than it has in any part of this pandemic before. And I don't think we need to be concentrating on politics. I think we need to be concentrating on make sure we got a handle on this. And I think that's the most significant problem with this election, is that it's caused at just the wrong time. It really is the wrong time. And it shouldn't be here right now while everybody's trying to sort their way through this mess and make it work. It's going to dilute thinking and process, and it's going to make it hard to keep the direction we've been going and the forward advancement we've been making on this. It's going to make it harder to keep that going. The momentum is going to drop away. So I'm really interested to see what the actual effects of this whole election will be on the pandemic itself within the province.
Well, realistically, there's only so many lines of attack, because the main topic of conversation is going to be around the government's response to coronavirus. So the opposition's approach has to be that the existing government did a lousy job of it, and the existing government's approach has to be that we've done wonderful things and need to do more. And so what does that do to the general public? We're already having problems with the so-called meme game, where people are sharing misinformation around mask safety, for example. So now if you have elected leadership in different camps attacking each other based on decisions and recommendations that have just been made around public health and public safety, what does that do to the public's confidence in the recommendations that are continuing to roll out? It's not like COVID's going to take a pause for 6 weeks while we decide who our new premier is going to be. There's still going to have to be public health directives. And to Chuck's point, the numbers are going up. So the public health directives are also going to start to go up. And if we've got our elected leadership in all of our communities screaming that each other doesn't know what's right and isn't doing the right thing and that they would do things differently, how does Joe Q public make a choice around whether they wear that mask into Superstore or not?
And that's a good point. The Liberals and the Greens, for a lot of the provisions, supported the government when it comes to COVID. So the numbers start to spike, and yeah, you're right. That's what becomes the conversation. That Andrew Wilkinson, when the election was called, he said he has a bold new plan for British Columbia that they're ready to unveil, and I don't know what it is, and he didn't release much other than I'm sure it's all about the economy, because that's what the Liberals are all about, is all about business. So when people are wondering, like you say, whether to wear a mask to the grocery store and whether they're going to get sick and die, when that becomes the election campaign, it's kind of like, well, what have you done, or what are you going to do to change that, rather than how you're going to support LNG.
So I challenge you just a bit on your characterization of the BC Liberals there. I think that they tend to be seen as the business party, but I actually don't believe that that's their only focus. I think that their approach, while it's not always something that I agree with every time, they see the ability to grow community and to improve quality of life through a strong economy. So it's I don't believe that their goal is just the economy. I think it's that they have a different approach to the goal that all elected officials have, which is to improve their community.
Yes. I committed the journalism faux pas of all generalizations are false.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that there's extreme variation within every political genre. And I mean, you've only to look at the work that Shirley Bond has done for community over her years, and she's always been a BC Liberal, and her focus truly has been community. So I think it's important to recognize that, yes, you can make sweeping generalizations, and we all do it. Those are the kinds of generalizations that are scaring the living bejesus out of me over the next 6 weeks, because I think that it's going to cause harm.
Yeah. Yeah, I really think so too. And I think that's going to be where I think the parties are going to have to be very careful, because letting some of these things grow that are out there, some of these memes that are going around and stuff, it's going to have an impact, you know, and not maybe so much on your older voter, but on your younger generations that are coming up and looking at these things, and they live on the internet, or they live on the social media, and it's going to have an impact.
Yeah, those digital natives, they all say they started in 97. So it's the year my son was born. So you got a bunch of 23-year-olds out there that for some of them, this could be the first time they've paid attention to an election.
Yeah.
A lot of that's going to be on social media.
Yeah, and it shows up some of the viciousness that, you know, this nothing really to do with the election, but, you know, Dr. Bonnie Henry revealed yesterday that she's received death threats, and she had to have security at her house, and you really wonder, and that's all part of, like we were talking about earlier, ramping up the rhetoric and just going crazy with memes on Facebook. And, you know, I've seen a few of them already, and I go, you know, on the PG Daily News page, I've been busy deleting posts all for days. That's one of the downside of the election. I'm going to spend it all on Facebook deleting posts from people who are just mean and just vicious and just not engaged with anything, but just want to get out there and be mean to people.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and yet if you close posting or commenting, or if you make it so that all posts have to be approved by a moderator, you'll be accused of controlling the message and limiting free speech.
And that's the joy of Facebook. You can't do that on Facebook.
Yeah.
I can do that on my site, but on the Facebook stuff, you can't. They don't allow you to. You can moderate comments and delete them, but you can't shut them off.
Well, I'd suggest that, again, since we're into this election, we have no choice. We're going forward with an election. I hope that people will look to the individuals. You know, disappointed or not in the decision our premier made to go back to the polls, we still have choices to make about who's actually going to take those seats and represent us in the legislature at the back end of this election. And I think now more than ever, if people get preoccupied with party rather than who that person is that they're sending to speak on their behalf, I don't know that we solve any of these problems, from equity and diversity to coronavirus to climate change. There's an awful lot at stake here. And if we allow them to move us into the team play, the red, orange, green, blue, whatever colors you want to go with, if we allow them to push us into that as if this is some kind of shortened playoff season, we're not doing what our communities need us to do.
Yeah, I think you're right, Tracy. I really think we need to make it more about the people, more about who's putting themselves out there to represent you than the parties that are behind them. I think the danger is, as you say, it's so easy to just let it become the parties. And especially with such a short build-up to an election like this, it's really simple just to say, yeah, well, you know, Liberals have been doing okay, I'm going to stick with that, and it's going to be fine. And or NDP, well, you know, NDP have shown some good things happening this last time around, I'm going to stick with them. Get to know the people who are in your riding, who are running in your riding, and find out what they're all about and what they can do for you. You know, I think that's really, really becoming important here. And there's not a lot of time, I agree, but, and there may not be a lot of opportunity with a lack of town halls and things. But the information can be found about these people, and just reach out a little bit, look at what they're hosting as their platforms on their sites, on, you know, and on general news sites, and try and find out more about the people. I think that's going to be really key this time around.
Yeah, and I think if your candidates don't make themselves accessible and available to have these kinds of conversations one-on-one online and to answer questions in a responsive manner, that they don't deserve your time or your support.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. That's been true for a long time, and I think, Tracy, you've been through a few of those all candidates forums where some candidates just choose not to attend, and sometimes not everybody can attend every forum, but I know there's been some here where that was the strategy, not to attend them, right? Which is in my mind wrong. I'm going back to prediction.
Prediction, huh?
Anybody gonna make a prediction?
I don't see any change in our 2 local ridings. I think Shirley and Mike will come back to the table for us. Provincially, I don't think the province is ready to go back to a Liberal government. And I think that if the NDP is punished, it will accrue benefit to the Greens only in close ridings. So I predict that we will have another minority government with BC Liberal support staying about where it is, NDP support dropping, and Green support rising. That's how I see it. And then who winds up running things, that will be up to the Lieutenant Governor, I guess.
Yeah, could be fun. I still think that when Horgan visited her on Monday, she should have called in Andrew Wilkinson and said, well, can you form a government? That would have been really
a good idea.
That would have been really interesting. But Chuck, any predictions on where this is going to end up?
Well, I think Tracy's probably called it pretty close there, you know. I can definitely see a rise in the Greens coming. And that's mostly due to disenchantment with the way things have gone with the election being called for by the NDP. So, yeah, I see rise in the Greens and drop in the NDP. Liberals, they're going to be very similar to the NDP. So it will come down to who can make the deal again. I really, really think that's what it's going to be. And will the Greens go with the NDP again? I mean, that was a pretty good slap they got. I'm not so sure they'll go with it.
That's Horgan rolling the dice, and it either pays off or doesn't. I think I'm along with you guys. I think I suspect that Horgan might not get the majority he wants. I think the NDP will probably still have will probably end up with the majority of seats, but not in a majority government. Until I would have thought that perhaps it would have been prime for an NDP majority, but Sonia Furstenau in the Green as the Green leader is proving herself so far. She's only been in it for a week, but she's always been well spoken of, or she's always been well respected and speaks well. And I think that sort of will make a difference, because I think part of maybe what the NDP were looking at is with a new leader in the Greens, that the Green support may fade. And I don't know that it will. And I think she's done well. I saw a Facebook post from Bruce Strachan, of all people, who said after the election call that she was the most, had the best response, out of the 3. She was, spoke the best out of all 3 of them. So that's coming from Bruce Strachan, so that's good praise, right?
Yeah, there's no way Bruce is a Green guy.
It's not something I would have expected.
But he's calling him as he sees him, and that's right. And she's been impressive to start. So that could spell danger for the NDP. And the NDP haven't done, other than, I have to give the NDP credit, is they've taken a page out of the Liberal playbook, certainly in the interior, and that's build things. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of money for schools and hospitals up here in the north. But other than that, they haven't had a big presence. Like there's not of Horgan's been up a couple of times, and Dix has been through, but they're not here all the time. And that's where I gave, when the Liberals were in power, granted these were Liberal seats then too, so you saw more cabinet ministers and that kind of thing. So it'll be different, and so I don't see that the Liberals or that the NDP are going to have many gains in the interior, and that's where they need to gain to form a majority in my mind.
Yeah, I think that's going to be their hard place to gain, is up here in the interior, up here in Kelowna, Kamloops, that kind of area. I don't see it changing too much, I really don't. So I think they're going to have a tough run of it.
So then the other question, Tracy, if we return a minority government, how does that bode for moving forward in a pandemic world?
I think the minority governments have been working really well together at the federal level and at the provincial level. So I don't have an inherent issue with it, other than the instability in this hyper-partisan world. So say we go back to another minority government, regardless of who's in the premier's seat, how long does that government stand before it falls? And now that we've had one snap election call and a breach between the Greens and the NDP, what does that mean for trust and confidence votes going forward? I suspect that it would mean that our government is that much more fragile and that much more likely to fall. And then what do we spend the next however long we're in the middle of a COVID pandemic, also in a endless cycle of election loops? I don't know. I mean, you're trying to read tea leaves, which we've all been doing a lot in 2020, and 2020 keeps telling us not to do it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, because the Horgan's gamble to try to create some stability in government, even though he already had it, it could end up really backfiring and us going to the polls in 2021 anyways.
Yeah.
And that's the real danger. So, yeah.
I guess, do the fixed election dates move now? So now we've had this election. Do we have one now automatically in 4 years, not on the original schedule?
I'm not sure how that works. The legislation, the NDP had changed it to fall elections, but fixed dates. Because they were in May before, so now they moved to the third Saturday in October or something like that. So if we have one now, I'm assuming that if a majority comes in, the next one would be in October 2024.
That would make sense, right?
It makes sense, but
Or it could roll 5 years, because they are permitted to run 5 years. That's the maximum under the legislation. But again, that would fly in the face of fixed election dates. So I have no idea. But it's an interesting question that you've posed in terms of what does this mean going forward?
Yeah, and minority governments always fly in the face of fixed election dates anyways, because they could fall at any time. Right?
Yeah.
At any time, but they could last a year, 18 months or whatever. So yeah, and that is a good question. Like, so if you fall after 18 months, where does that put the fixed election date? Does that clock start ticking again? Or?
Yeah, I don't know how that works.
The more we talk about that, it just surprises me more and more that they called this snap election. Mm-hmm. I mean, they had another year guaranteed, pretty much.
Yeah.
And why would you? I mean, yeah, you saw your popularity come up a bit, but you had another year to work on it and make it work perfect.
Yeah.
Or to actually do the job of governing.
Yeah.
That's the whole reason we send people to represent us at any level of government, is to actually govern and to have the big picture and to make long-term plans. And if they spend all their time trying to get reelected and worrying about when their best time to pull the trigger is, I don't think they're doing the job they were elected to do in the first place.
Yeah, let it run the course and then just go, okay, now's our time. This is when it's going to happen. So let's just do it. I'm really, really surprised.
Me too.
And a little disappointed. Well, not just a little.
Yeah, I am disappointed, and I'm with you. I truly did not think that we'd be at the polls. I really didn't believe it. I couldn't see our elected officials being that short-sighted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's all about staying in power, right? I'm sure they're looking at, the economy could tank even further in the next year. What if the death rate rises and then people are mad because, geez, there's, we're losing people left, right, and center. And you go to election then for sure you're going to get turfed out, right?
Well, what's their stated reason for the election?
Well, basically, Oregon, that's all they said is they want to have a stable government to have a longer mandate. In his words, if we go forward from here, then the next year will be, in his words, a bunch of hectoring as the campaign will last a year because we're into an election year. So, I don't really follow that, or I follow it, but I don't agree with it. We're not like the US. Our campaigning doesn't really start in January and go till November. Our campaigns are a little shorter. And there's always hectoring going on in government in opposition to bring forward bills. People are going to, pick on you or criticize you or whatever. So, yeah, it's just all about staying in power. And they probably they have a better chance now than they will a year from now.
It's such a cynical view.
It is.
I wish there was a good reason to go now that I could get behind, but I haven't heard one. I have yet to hear a reason that we need to go to the polls right now that makes any sense to me.
Yeah, that's the thing that gets me is there is no reason that I've seen, and there's lots of reasons not to. So I just don't understand it.
Yeah, there's a million reasons not to. So
yeah.
And I joke that I joked before the election call that it's that of course there's going to be one because nobody in British Columbia wants one, so that's a good time to call. It's a typical political thing. Nobody wants this, so let's give it to them.
Yeah.
Well, I feel for the candidates. I don't care what party they're in, to have this dropped in their lap with 6 weeks notice and in the middle of a pandemic and whatever's going on in their personal and their professional lives aside from politics. I can't even imagine trying to enter into this right now. So I definitely feel for anybody who's running in any party, and they have my utmost respect.
Yeah, and the candidates are probably going to hear a lot on the doorstep if they're outdoor knocking or however, or Zoom knocking like we're doing or whatever we do. And they're probably going to get an earful a lot of times. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah, actually saw a post from Shirley Bond, and she wrote, there was a picture of her and her grandkids, and she was reading them a story, and she wrote, yeah, so they dropped an election. Well, I got things going on right now, so it's just going to have to wait.
Yeah, I laughed too because she posted another one about how she had to go pick up her grandson's skates and run them to the arena. So, so there you are in the middle of an election, and there's real life going on too, right?
Yeah.
At least for the women.
Yeah.
Apparently.
But that's pretty much come to the end of our time. We'll give some final comments from everybody. And then Chuck, we'll start with you.
Well, we're in that cycle again. It's election time, and yeehaw, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be quick. So fasten your seatbelts and pay attention. Look at the people. Really look at the people that are running. And hopefully we can put it all together and come out on the other side with something good.
Yeah, I'm with you, Chuck. I think it's important that people pay attention. It is only going to be 6 weeks, and it's going to be a slightly different approach to the same topics we've been talking about forever. So pay attention and vote, and make absolutely certain that you get your kids to vote that are of age, and your parents to vote, and all your neighbors. This is really important stuff, and we need to get people engaged in it. So please, please do be engaged and avoid the meme game. If you see a meme that you really like and you like what it's saying, do all the research to make sure that it's right, and then share your opinion on top of that meme. Don't just hit share.
Yeah, and the only thing I add is, once again, is vote, vote, vote. I say that all the time. I don't care if you vote for the Rhinoceros Party. Get out and vote, because that's part of what we do. And you only have to look around the world at so many, it seems more places these days where where democracies are having trouble, and you know, let's not go there. And the only way we can not go there is to get out and vote. And on that note, I want to thank Chuck and Tracy, and we'll see you all again next week.
Take care, guys.